It had been probably 3 or 4 years at this point since I had run, and I was like a 2 flat guy in high school. As a sophomore, I never broke 2, and I was like, I'm gonna train for the 800. I think I can get on the varsity team, and I was delusional. And so I walk out to the track, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna run an 800 off the couch. What can I run? Keep in mind, the only training that I was doing was strength training, both upper and lower body, strictly hypertrophy based, so high rep, high volume, and I was able to run 204 untrained. That is not something that's specific, but that's not a me thing, especially for things like the 800 and 400. We tend to overvalue our base fitness level, right? If you take a lot of runners and you have them detrain for years and years and years, and then you have them retrain, even for like a few weeks, they will be able to get 80 to 90% of the way back to where they were.
That was Dr. Bill Evans today on the Running Effect podcast. I always love the opportunities when I get to sit down with people so much smarter than me. Dr. Evans being one of those people who has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to how to train properly and how to maximize the time that you put into your training to ultimately become faster. That's why we do this sport at the end of the day, to explore the human limits that we have ourselves and to see if we can push those higher than we think we can. I love this conversation. We dive into a lot of different things in regards to training theory, strength training, what you should explicitly be doing in the gym, the 3 exercises that are going to make you a better runner. We talk about supplements, the ones that work, the ones that don't. This one is information packed. If you find value from it, share it with a friend. That is the easiest way in which we can grow. Give us a 5-star review and make sure you are following the podcast so you never miss another episode. I really appreciate you all. Thank you so much for listening to this conversation today, listening to the podcast in general. I don't take it lightly that you choose to spend your days with me or your runs with me, and I greatly appreciate it. Don't take it for granted, and I will continue to try and produce the best, most informative and helpful conversations I possibly can. I appreciate you all. Hope you all had an amazing Christmas, or if this comes out before Christmas, have an amazing Christmas, and enjoy this conversation with a legend. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sitting across from me. That made no sense, but we'll keep it rolling to show this man that we're light, we're conversational today. A man across from me who has way more knowledge than I could possibly fathom, and trying to learn a thing or two about exercise physiology. Dr. Bill Evans, how you doing, man?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Let's start with this. We're at the end of 2025. What's the biggest learning from this year, if you had to nail it down to one thing?
The biggest thing I've learned personally or physiologically?
Either or. Could be the same thing.
Okay, so I'll break it into both. So the biggest thing I learned physiologically this year is probably about critical power. It's something I've known about, it's something I've read about, but when you think about races or events that are anaerobic in nature or have an anaerobic element, and every race does, even the marathon, right? When you're kicking down that last stretch, there's a relationship between the power output that you have and how long you can sustain that power output. And it's very, very, very predictable. In fact, it's ubiquitous across species. So when they look at animals like lungless salamanders, don't ask me what that is. Don't ask me who did that experiment. But they were able to show that the power output, at any given power output, the time that they sustain that output is the same as in humans when they look at their percent of their max power output. And essentially it forms this curve where it's really steep at first and it gets flatter and flatter and flatter until you can sustain aerobic energy. So, it's one of those constructs that you maybe learn about the physiological underpinnings, but then when you really understand what it is, it kind of transforms the way you think about events, particularly like the mile and the 800 and even the 5K or 3K. And then on the personal side, the biggest thing I've learned is actually it's about just being a dad. So I have 2 young kids, and I think at times it's really easy to try and let your passions or your career or your personal interests kind of pull you in all sorts of different directions. But having 2 young kids has really reframed the way that I view things. And I have to give a big shout out to my wife. She's the best. She really supports me in all the things that I do. And so definitely like a changing of priorities as I've kind of transitioned in life.
So many different avenues we could go down from this point, but I guess kind of setting the stage, what's the elevator pitch, that's not a pitch, elevator story to the listener of how you got into this space? Because I feel like I'd seen some of your videos pop up every now and again, and then I saw one the other day and kind of went down a deep rabbit hole. I was like, oh, I want to have a conversation with this guy, but you seem relatively new to this whole thing. And what I find fascinating about someone like yourself is there are a lot of different people who study exercise physiology, but very few are articulate or exciting on camera. And that's why I feel like an account like yours is rare, where you combine both.
Oh, cool. Man, that's encouraging to hear. And I always love positive feedback. I struggle with negative feedback, but
Don't we all?
yeah, I know it's tough. Sometimes the haters be getting in the comments though. So how did I end up here? So I'm a professor at this university, and I love teaching, and I'm super passionate about physiology in a way that a lot of my students they kind of call me like a geeky nerd and whatever. But I have an identical twin brother, actually. So he is, believe it or not, a jumper and a sprinter, and I am a distance runner. And he runs a business called THP, or Translating Human Performance, where he coaches athletes to jump and sprint. So he's kind of like an athletic development coach. And I saw what he was doing, and I was like, oh, that's cool, but like I'm really nervous. Like I don't want to put myself out there, like I don't want people to say bad things about me. And at one point he just looked at me and was like, dude, just do it. Like what do you have to lose? You have nothing to lose. And I kind of took that advice and stewed on it for a few weeks and was like, you know what? I'm just going to go for it. And so I didn't know exactly what I was going to talk about at first, but I was like, well, what do I love? What do I know about? And that is running. And so kind of the motto of my message, I guess, would be kind of debunk or demystify even some of the complex physiological things that kind of underline training, and then also just break down things that maybe just fundamentally aren't true, right? So maybe someone says, take this extract oil, it's going to increase your VO2 max. It's like, well, does it? I don't know. Let's talk about it. And so I'm a pretty theatric person. You may not get it in this podcast. At some point you might, but I like to have a good time. And so it probably just comes across. I have pretty crippling ADHD as well. So if that also comes across during this, apologies.
You mentioned some of the hate you might potentially get on social media. What do you feel like is the biggest subject that when you post it, it's going to cause division in the comments?
That's such a good question.
And let me guess real fast. If I had to guess, it's got to do something, with all respect, if you're listening, with the hobby joggers. It's got to do something with like zone 2 training. It's got to be.
So I think it borders that. So the one that I knew when I posted was going to maybe ruffle some feathers, and my wife kind of looked at me and she was like, you're going to post that? And I was like, I'm going to do it. Was in regards to genetics and kind of this idea that when it comes to distance running in particular, and I mean distance running in particular, anything from the 800, I'll say is distance running, all the way up to the 10K or marathon, there's no fitness-related allele or genetic profile that can predict elite performance. So the take that I have, and I've talked to a lot of experts in the field of exercise genomics, like Mike Joyner, Jim Hagberg, Steve Roth, he's actually my PhD grandfather. He mentored my advisor. And essentially, all the research points to the fact that there is no genetic profile that can delineate who will become an Olympian and who will not. And so kind of the point of the video is like, hey, like anybody can become an Olympian. And I think the way that was perceived was maybe misunderstood. It was supposed to be like, be hopeful, be encouraged, like, you're not at your peak yet. You can always get better. Keep training, keep trying, keep striving for your goals. But I think people took it as like, you're not trying hard enough. Like you could have been an Olympian, but you're just not trying hard enough. And I was like, well, that's not, I guess you could take it that way, but that wasn't what the take was. It was more like, ooh, this is a cool, interesting thing, and I'm an identical twin, and we're physiologically on different ends of the spectrum, and yet, we're genetically identical. So, yeah, that was the one, and then the detraining one. People did not like the detraining one, and I understand why. I genuinely do. I think And for context, that video essentially just talks about a paper from, I think, the 1980s by John Halsey's lab. And it basically showed the changes in enzyme concentrations following 7 days of detraining. And these were people who had trained every day for years and years and years and years. And they got them to detrain for, I think, 90 days or something, a pretty long time. And they measured a ton of different variables. So they measured, what we call aerobic enzymes. So these are the enzymes that help you to run well. And an enzyme is just a machine in your body that helps you consume oxygen and produce energy, in this case. And those dropped within like 6 days. And they dropped a lot. So I want to say between 20 and 40%. And then when they looked at things like VO2 max, that also dropped by 15 to 20%. And so the longer that they detrained, they saw these very important physiological parameters drop and drop and drop. And unfortunately, it happens pretty quick. And that is one thing that we know about distance running, particularly, rather what I want to say is when we all detrain, like you took some time after your marathon, I'm sure, to take a few down days, when you get back on the horse, even if it's a week or two, it feels really hard. And there's a reason for that. It's physiological. It's not mental. But I think I was kind of perceived as like, you're not allowed to take off days, don't recover. And I think it maybe created some feelings towards like over-exercising, but that wasn't the take. It's more just to share like, hey, this is why when you take some time off after racing, why it can feel bad. So those are the two that have been kind of the quote unquote like hottest takes.
Do you think, in regards to the first one, my take with that, I will be harsh and I'll say, well, I think generally it's true that people just don't have the work ethic that the Olympians I know have. And if they did, they'd probably go a lot further than they think they could. I think my personal take, not backed by any sort of science, just purely empirical, is I think to win medals, I think you need some sort of talent or genetic help is a strong word, but be predisposed to like decent endurance genetics. But I think to my take that I think is pretty soft, but a lot of people disagree. I think that anyone could go D1 in almost about anything, but specifically distance running, where it's way easier to get into the pool. It's less of a skill sport. Olympics, it depends on the country, because even to qualify for some country in the Middle East where you just need to get the Olympic standard versus top 3 in the US when everyone has the Olympic standard in the field is a different ball game. But I think as a society, we hate taking personal ownership, and we hate saying I wasn't good enough or simply I didn't put in the effort, because that's a reflection in our opinions of our identity rather than just like, no, I just didn't care enough to put in the work, or maybe I am just lazy. Can we sit with that? I'm lazy at times. Like,
yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. Being lazy is a good thing. Recovery is important. Kind of two things that jumped to my mind when you said that is, so there's a study actually from the 1980s where they looked at this famous shot putter, and they're supposed to be anonymous, but when you read the paper, it's pretty obvious who it is. I think his name is Gunnar, his first name, or Gunther. I don't know his last name, but I think he was a world champion, or he was at the Olympic stage. And what they did is they took a muscle biopsy, right? So they essentially took a chunk of his muscle, and I don't know how scientifically oriented your listeners are, so I'll explain it, but basically they can stain it with a special stain, and it can determine what we call your fiber profile. And so there are 3 types of muscle fibers. There are slow twitch, which are generally, as explained, fatigue resistant. They're going to be more predominant in marathoners. An intermediate type that are, think more 800 runners, and then a fast twitch fiber, which would be more like a sprinter or a thrower. And when they looked at this thrower, and they also looked at his brother, what they found is that they had very low percentages of type 2X fibers. So those are the explosive fast twitch fibers, and they had a reasonably high amount of type 1 fibers. And even after years and years of training, he and his brother, who was untrained, had similar muscle profiles. So yes, genetics do matter for determining your fiber type distribution. But you would not expect an elite thrower to have a low percentage of type 2 fibers. That's an explosive event. You would predict that they have a high percentage of type 2 fibers. Conversely, or similarly, in another study where they looked at a bunch of elite marathoners and middle distance runners. So Don Cardong is a big name from this study. It wasn't Jim Ryan, Frank Shorter, and then Steve Prefontaine. Don Cardone had the lowest percentage of type 1 fibers, as low as 50% in his calf, whereas other runners had as high as like 80 or 90% type 1 fibers. But the size of those fibers were vastly different, both for the throwers, he and his brother, and for the distance runners. So what this points to is the fact that even this thing that we know is genetically predispositioned is incredibly trainable. And that's really the takeaway, is like, hey, sure, there is genetics do determine to some extent these values, but there's also a lot of other things that go into it. Nutrition as a kid, there's a lot of epigenetics at play, which is like which genes get turned on and which genes get turned off. Your genetics are as much the actor as they are acted upon from your environment. So we know that smoking, diet, exercise, all these things can change not necessarily your genome, which is the blueprint, but they can change the way that genome is expressed, or things like that. So that's kind of the like, there really is no research to support that, you're going to be an Olympian, you're not going to be an Olympian. And I think in some respects, Jakob, as an example, speaks to this, right? Sure, he comes from a family of Olympians. He also ran, allegedly, and maybe you know more than I do on this, a lot of miles since he was a little kid. I mean, a lot of miles. He has dedicated his life to training. So, it's more like that's a hard example to pull out. He has elite genes, but he also trained and dedicated his life to it. And as you said, there is a mental component. There's a health component. Who can stay healthy? So anyways, I think all these things come together. And that's why it is multifactorial, but I just don't think genetics are the end-all, be-all.
What's interesting about Jakob, too, is his brothers were never as good as he was, and he started training earlier than his brothers did. And I think the oldest brother was the most normal-looking guy of all time. So, and I don't think if his oldest brother started training that he would be anywhere near the Olympics, just because he would have started training seriously so late. And, I mean, his dad had them on, like, just the most insane protocol where he was like having them cross-country ski to up their VO2 max before their bodies could take the load of like actual distance running, and then he like transferred them off so that by the time they started running, their VO2 max was so high from cross-country skiing. He'd take them in parking garages to cross-country ski. It was,
That's the only way to get it done. Like you're in Columbus, Ohio. You got snow right now. Get the skis on and get to work.
Exactly. Less excuses. I want to ask you a question I've asked other exercise physiologists. It's a little outside of, I think, that realm, but you're a smart guy, so maybe you can provide some clarity here. This is not how I'm trying to live my life, but I had this thought like a year ago, and I still haven't really gotten a clear-cut response on it. What I'm curious about, and I don't have the question like fully articulated, but the substance of the question is, and this actually makes sense too for Jakob and his brothers, given he's the youngest. Like, I'm 20 years old. I'll turn 21 in May. Okay. Let's say in 5 years, let's say I have a kid right now, okay? So Dominic in this state, I have a kid right now. Let's say in 5 years, I put on 20 pounds of lean muscle and I do double threshold for 3 of those years. I up my VO2 max by, let's say, 20%. And I kind of become superhuman version of Dom. I get on a better diet. I sleep more. I'm just a fundamentally different version, 25 than 20. I have a kid when I'm 25. Is that second kid going to be genetically or just like more susceptible to have higher chances of being more of an elite athlete or health-wise human being?
So if I'm understanding this right, the question is, can your behavior alter the genetics that your children will inherit?
There you go. Didn't need to talk for 2 minutes.
No, that's good. That's good. So it will not change their genome. So Steve Roth, the guy I was talking about, he tested this in animals. He had generations of rodents exercise, and he looked at their offspring. He looked at their VO2 maxes. He looked at their genetic profile. I think he even looked at epigenetic or allele frequencies. So an allele is which gene you actually, which version of a gene you actually get. So the classic Mendel study looked at green and yellow peas, right? And so there was a gene or an allele for green and an allele for yellow, right? And so he looked at these things, and unfortunately there was no effect of exercise training across generations. But that's an animal study. The reason I think that it could matter is more for the behavioral element. If you have a child, particularly, I think your first child would probably be more predisposed to have a better chance of becoming an Olympian than, well, I guess it depends how you continue to act through the next 5 years with your second child. But your first child is going to observe you living in a way that they are going to model, right? Your kids are, you don't have kids yet, but they're subject to what you do. So they're living in an environment and around someone who's dedicating a lot of time and effort to their exercise, diet, and health. And they, as a result, are going to be subjected to that because they can't do anything else for themselves. They can't. And so, frankly, like, this is why I think it's so important as parents, and I don't know the research on this, but I'm fairly certain that there's enough work to show that when you have like loved ones or caretakers that take care of themselves, that influences the offspring, right? The health outcomes are better for communities of higher socioeconomic status because the kids see it, they observe it, they live in an environment that supports their health. So no, genetically speaking, it will not do it, but they will not inherit different traits, but they will observe that behavior, and that will go a lot further than anything you could do for their genome.
So many thoughts going on right now. So basically, my kids' genetics are set as long as I'll have kids.
Their genetics are set. You mean to say that like they will inherit?
Like there's nothing I can do to maximize. You always hear parents who are like, "Oh, I'm gonna have Olympic babies."
There's one thing you can do. Are you ready?
Marry someone who's remarkably, yeah.
You need to find someone who is an Olympian because your children will inherit the maternal mitochondrial DNA. So your mitochondria, it's the only organelle in your body that has its own genetic blueprint. And so that is inherited from the mother, not the father. And so my kids, they got my wife's oxidative or aerobic capacity, so to speak.
Interesting. So it comes from the female, not the male.
Correct. Yeah. I think oftentimes we think that but no, it comes from the mom. So when you look at like Matt Centrowitz, really we should be talking about his mom. And
actually knows why. She's been on the podcast before.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So so maternal DNA or maternal mitochondrial DNA is what is handed down. Now, there doesn't appear to be a very clear relationship between that maternal mitochondrial DNA and performance, but frankly, I don't know how much work there's actually been done on it. To my understanding, it's like there isn't, but who knows? Like, we're getting new methods every year to analyze these things, and there could be other things that could influence it or interact with it.
Does the same question I ask you in regards to genetics passing on apply to females as well, or is that a little bit different? Does behavioral things from a female perspective shift the traits of their kids?
So
tell me what plan I need to put my future wife on.
So I'm fairly certain that mothers we know that maternal behavior, particularly when the baby is pregnant, and I don't want this to be misconstrued because there's a lot of conversations around this. So let me be very clear about this. Mothers are not responsible for the outcomes of their children genetically, or people love to talk about autism. That is not what this conversation is about, okay? What we're talking about is that exercise can influence epigenetics. And so does it directly influence the child's genome? Absolutely not. In no way, shape, or form does it, right? We know that there's what we call a spatial temporal relationship. So essentially, in animal studies, when they go in and they mess with the embryo during the embryonic stages, they can change some different outcomes, right? But a lot of those techniques are genetic in nature, right? They're literally introducing new genes into the genome. That is not something we do as humans, and I hope it's something that we never do as humans. But certain behaviors, simple example would be like fetal alcohol syndrome, right? We know that fetal alcohol syndrome or alcohol consumption while a mother is pregnant will increase the likelihood of fetal alcohol syndrome, which affects the child. So I don't want this conversation to be misconstrued in any way, but like, yes, there's reason to believe that exercise could, in theory, particularly during pregnancy, could influence the child, but there isn't any clear data to be like moms who exercised when when their babies were embryonic had better outcomes, like their kids had better outcomes. That's not a thing. If anything, it's probably behavioral again, right? Because moms who exercise in general are going to more than likely exercise while they're pregnant. Well, moms who are engaging in that behavior value exercise. And so their children are going to value exercise because they observe their parents year over year exercise and engage in healthy behavior. And so again, I don't think it's as causal as people want it to be. I think it's more correlative in that there's other things that probably explain why that is the way it is.
Good stuff. Super interesting. In regards to the ceiling of like talent or capability, kid comes into the world, has a ceiling of talent. How much through behavior can we push that ceiling upwards? Or is there just a set ceiling on our talent?
So this is really what the point of the video is, and maybe the contention, but we know from studies on adults, these are adults, right? We know that an untrained individual can increase their VO2 max by almost double. It's not quite double, but it's between 30 and 40% from completely untrained to highly, highly, highly trained. And this study is the Hickson protocol, where they get on a bike and they basically do VO2 max intervals like 2 or 3 times a week, and then on their off days they do really hard thresholds. So it's not for the light of heart. It's not sustainable. It can cause injury. Again, I got a lot of pushback from people who watched that video. But again, it's more about the physiology, kind of how certain training paradigms influence your physiology, like your VO2 max and heart. So it went up 40 to 50%, right? I mean, that is massive. For context, that is the difference between like running at, we use something called a metabolic equivalent, right? You're going to be running at like 7 mets all the way up to 14 mets. And so 14 times 3.5 is roughly the VO2 involved there. We're talking like a doubling of performance, a doubling of oxygen consumption. That is huge, right? And obviously, as you get closer and closer to that limit, those jumps become smaller and smaller and smaller. But the other thing to mention is that humans, anthropologists have studied this, humans are long distance creatures. We are not sprinters by nature, right? If you think about any animal, like think about a house cat. Could you beat a house cat in a race, like a 100-meter dash? No, probably not, right? Especially for their size, they are much, much faster. Could we outfly a bird? No, they're faster. Lizards, faster. Frogs, they jump incredibly high. They're incredibly explosive. Most animals are much more explosive than we are as humans. They're much, much faster, aside from things like sloths and turtles. But humans are really going to be much more of an endurance type of creature. And so this is why I think that when it comes to genetics, they play a larger role for sprinting. This is just my opinion, based on like our, as a species, right? They play a much larger role for like sprinting and potentially throwing or jumping than they might for long distance running, because we're already as a species predisposed to distance running. And I think that's, you'll often hear like, our ancestors used to chase buffaloes for days. I've never read that study. I'm just going based on like hearsay, but it makes sense anecdotally when you think about nature and creatures like other species. They're much faster than we are. And I say that also acknowledging that my brother's job is to make people jump higher and run faster, and he can dunk a basketball and has over a 40-inch vert, and I don't.
How tall is he?
We're identical twins, so we're both, he's 5'11". He's, perfect example again, he squatted when he was a kid, he compressed his spine. I am 6'1". So
interesting.
Yeah, and we are genetically identical. We had the test done.
Is that if you squat, does that compress your spine, or did he squat improperly?
Could be both. Squatting will compress your spine, generally acutely, but if you're doing it year over year, and again, this is just anecdotal, and I'm pretty sure there's research on this, though there's also a study on runners and back health that shows that runners actually have more fluid in their discs and better back health scores. So maybe there's contrarian data when it comes to back squats where it's like, this is the common perception, but maybe there's other data. I don't know it. But But I will say anecdotally, he is shorter than me. He squats probably twice as much as I do. And he jumps maybe twice as high.
Wow.
So all that to say, I'm not an elite runner by any means. My
237?
237, thank
Marathon?
you.
Yeah, that's
Thank
impressive.
you. Yeah, I was excited. That was my opener. My goal is to run sub 230 someday, but I'm more of a middle distance runner actually. My 1500 was 358, and my 800, which I think could have been better, but it was only 157 indoors before 2020. And then my 400 was 50. So, so still some speed there, but he's much, much faster, much more explosive than I ever was.
I only asked the question because I'm 6'2", and actual 6'2", not male who's a 5'10", saying he's 6'2". I might be closer to 6'3" than I am 6'2", and I can't dunk, but I'm at the height where I would love to dunk. And I think it came from, and this is maybe a good segue here, I didn't really strength train growing up. I didn't really know what I was doing or what to do, and so I think I kind of just messed around, did some pull-ups occasionally, I did some curls, didn't really know what I was doing. And looking back, if I could change one thing about my experience, I think it would be that, because I actually think a lot of my injuries were stemmed from lack of strength training. And I also think I was so, this connects to a second point, and then just jam off of whatever you want to. Last summer, so summer of 2024, I was kind of done with like just the 60-mile-a-week grind and was busy with work. So I was like, I'm going to go to the track and do track workouts like, I don't know, twice, 3 times a week. And so I started doing like really, I wouldn't say sprint training, but like 800-meter training for the first time ever. Because in high school, I was running like 65-mile weeks and didn't really do any speed work. A lot of threshold and then like some intervals, but really was never doing like 200s fast. And so for the first time ever, I was like breaking 30 in the 200, which I should have been doing in high school. I was like a 16-minute 5K guy. And did that for a few months, had some solid workouts. And then what's crazy is this past summer was not running like at all, but this was about a year into seriously going to the gym. I was at the track for a photo shoot for like a singlet launch, and I just ripped it all out 200.
Can I get that calendar? Like, can I get that?
A singlet?
I want that. I want that photo shoot calendar emailed to my house of Dominic's singlet photo shoot.
I can do that. We'll send over the details. But I ran 26 point off of like no sprint. Like I was not doing any workouts. Was barely running, and this could be purely speculative, but I think it was almost entirely from the gains I had made the summer before, but more specifically from being in the gym. And that shocked me.
That lifting and plyometrics work.
And by the way, real quick, 2 years before, consistent 60-mile weeks, couldn't break 30.
Yep. I mean, that makes sense, right? So there's multiple things at play. You're probably also still developing. Like you're young, man. You're incredibly successful, but you're young. And so your body is still continuing to grow and develop. And so you're introducing that resistance training. We know very, very well that max strength predicts sprint speed. Like there are actually certain metrics. Who's the author? I want to say it's like Bondarchuk or something. But there's these very specific metrics where we can say like, oh, you hit this squat or this, I don't know, ground reaction time or RSI, reactive strength index. These are metrics that sprinters use, not distance runners. And if you hit these metrics, then all right, you're at the level that Olympians are, because they took a bunch of Olympians and just measured all their strength across these different events and essentially showed that like elite shot putters, they at the very least, bare minimum, can squat this much. They bench this much. They jump this high. They sprint this fast. And so there's a very strong relationship between max strength and sprint speed. However, there is other things at play. So I've been reading a lot of, I think it's Gareth Stafford or Stanford work on the 800 run, like I was talking about. And one of the other things to keep in mind is there's something called a ground reaction force. So this is the moment your foot hits the ground and then pushes off. And so that force, so not just how hard you're hitting and pushing off, but also how long your foot is on the ground, largely determines how fast you're going to sprint. And when you lift, you're increasing that forced component. You're able to push off the ground harder. The thing it doesn't necessarily do is improve your ground reaction time, or what we call your elasticity or the stiffness of your lower leg, which is a very important determinant of sprint performance. So, but what we do know is that long distance running will reduce both of those. So you kind of went from one end of the spectrum where it's only going to hurt your sprint performance to the other end where now you're doing something that's absolutely dedicated to sprint performance. And the only quick anecdote I have is when I was in college, I wasn't able to run in college because I had back surgery when I was 18. I wasn't doing strength training, but I was like, you know what, I'm going to make a return. I'm going to come back to the sport. I hadn't run in years. It had been probably 3 or 4 years at this point since I had run. And I was like a 2 flat guy in high school. As a sophomore, I never broke 2. And I was like, I'm going to train for the 800. I think I can get on the varsity team. And I was delusional. And so I walk out to the track and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to run an 800 off the couch. What can I run? Keep in mind, the only training that I was doing was strength training, both upper and lower body, strictly hypertrophy based. So high rep, high volume. And I was able to run 204 untrained. That is not something that's specific, but that's not a me thing, right? I think we tend to, especially for things like the 800 and 400, we tend to overvalue maybe our base fitness level, right? If you take a lot of runners and you have them detrain for years and years and years, and then you have them retrain, even for like a few weeks, they will be able to get 80 to 90% of the way back to where they were. And there's a classic study, it's called the Dallas bed rest study, that did this. It took men at the age of 20. I think it took 6 men at the age of 20, and they had them go on bed rest, dedicated bed rest for 3 weeks. The drop in VO2 max and cardiac output and stroke volume and all these important metrics was greater. That drop, that decline, was greater than the decline that they saw after 30 years of aging. So what that tells us is that your body is extremely susceptible to complete detraining. But as you age, you actually retain a lot more than you think you do, whether you train or not, like if you're just physically active. And so that's why I think that just generally being active and lifting weights, like, yeah, you're going to retain your tendon stiffness. You're going to retain that muscular strength. You're going to run faster.
What should runners listening who want to be great at the sport look to do in the gym?
I would say the 2 easiest things you can do, the biggest bang for your buck, are going to be heavy calf raises. There's a study that did 2 sets of heavy calf raises, and I think they did like a 5x5 rep scheme, so 5 sets of 5 reps. They did, I think it was standing calf raises, but I would also argue you need to incorporate seated calf raises as well because it works a different muscle. They showed that their running economy improved by a lot, like up to, I want to say 6%. And then similarly, when they do something simple as what we call a pogo plyometric, so plyometrics are just going to be hopping essentially, they saw similar results. And I posted about this recently, but there's a study by Jeff Burns that looked at elite milers compared to good milers. So think like 358 milers versus 327 milers. And what they showed is that the elite milers, the only difference, their stride rate was the same. Their heights were roughly the same. All these things, their stride pattern, so to speak, was similar. The only thing that was different was how bouncy they were. So they looked at their lower leg stiffness, or the stiffness of their legs in general, and what they found is that for any change in length as they are running, right? Because you run, you kind of bounce up and down. For any change in that up and down, they had more force being produced. So they had a stiffer lower leg. And we know that the easiest way to increase stiffness of the leg is to do plyometrics. So do things like pogos or squat jumps, or there's all sorts of plyometrics you can do. There's easy ways to make them more or less intense. You can go from 2 legs to 1 leg. That'll go from less intense to more intense. You can increase the height of the jump. That'll get more intense. Or you can make your contacts stiffer versus mushier. A stiffer contact, so kind of hitting and slapping, is going to be a much more intense plyometric. And so you can use that kind of protocol to increase the intensity of those plyometrics, get stiffer lower legs, and run faster.
How many days in the gym would you say an elite athlete should be, or an athlete trying to be elite should shoot for? And how should they schedule those workouts in with maybe the long runs and the track workouts that they already have within the week?
Yeah, so this is context dependent, right? So if you're thinking about a 5K versus a 400 versus an 800, but let's start
Let's say
minimum,
high school, right? 5K, 2 mile.
Okay. High
Make your life
school,
easier.
5K, mile, 2 mile. You do not need any more than 2 days in the gym. We know that training for just one day a week is enough to elicit adaptations. I have a class that I run, and I had I think like 8 people come into my class, and my students were the personal trainers for these clients, and we saw increases in strength of 10 to 20% doing one day of strength training per week, one day. And that strength training improvement occurred within 5 weeks. 20% increase in strength within 5 weeks. So you don't necessarily need to be in there like all the time, always, all year round. Like more is not always better. This is why good coaching will periodize you and will know what to prescribe when and when to give you downtime and stuff like that. But generally speaking, twice a week. And if the only 2 things you did, let's give them 3 things. Do 3 things in the gym. Do heavy leg press or squat. Do some type of plyometric. Do the plyo before the heavy lifting. And then do some calf strength, like heavy calf strength. Basically as heavy as you can go without hurting yourself. Make sure you have a spotter, you know what you're doing, all that stuff. If you just did that, and that was it, and then you did some planks, that would give you the most bang for your buck. And when you're in high school, you have tons of constraints. You're in musicals, you're in clubs, maybe you're a member at your church, you've got different friends groups, you might have a job. You don't have a ton of time. You don't have unlimited time like an elite athlete. So best bang for your buck is those 3 things, and never let it over prioritize your running. So it should generally, what I do is I do it the day after a workout. So this is somewhat contentious because plyometrics, you need to hit certain intensities, but when you have athletes who are not familiar with plyometrics, they're going to hit those intensities because they're distance runners. They aren't good at plyometrics. Just doing them is going to make them better. So they should never come before a workout, right? You should never be doing strength or plyometrics before, at least heavy intense plyometrics, before your workouts. Your workouts should always be the priority. And then, you could do them the same day. I like to do them the next day. But definitely don't do heavy lifting the day before a workout if you can avoid it.
Talk about the elephant in the room that people are screaming at me to ask you about, supplements, your favorite subject on this planet. Do any work to the extent that you would confidently state on this podcast people should be taking?
Yeah, absolutely. So the two biggest ones that I would, and everybody should be taking these, are going to be caffeine and bicarb. So sodium bicarbonate, and those should not come as a surprise. But I
thought you were going to say creatine and vitamin D.
No. Vitamin D is kind of, sure, it might help, but it's, especially when it comes to
more
stress
general
fraction.
health, right?
Yeah, like it can help. It kind of depends if you're deficient in it. And that's the thing with any supplement. If you're deficient in a supplement, it would probably help to take. So particularly females, like iron deficiency can be more common because of female menstruation, right? So iron supplements are often prescribed and they're very helpful. And I would say in general though, caffeine is, that's the best, right? Caffeine's like very effective, consistently effective across almost every sport. It's just go-to, number 1, right? Number 2 is going to be bicarb. So bicarb, there's some studies out there that show that it can increase your 1500 meter time. And granted, this is not in elite 1500 meter runners, but it can increase it by up to 5 seconds. So I think it was in runners running maybe like 420 in the 15. They went from like 420 to, 415. Right? That is not a small jump. That is a meaningful jump. Now, the downside to both of those is that they're going to hurt your belly. So if you're not used to using them, it's going to potentially mess you up more than it's worth. You might be glued to the toilet and miss the start time. So, you've got to be careful in like how you're taking these. You need to practice with the dosing and practice with the timing. There are, like bicarb, you need to take like roughly an hour before your workout, right? You can't take it right up next to it. And I know that Morton kind of like seems to have this figured out. They use like a hydrogel called alginate, which is actually derived from seaweed, I believe. And so, from what I understand, it encapsulates the bicarb so that it doesn't like fully mess up your stomach, right? Because it gets into your bloodstream a little quicker as opposed to just running through your stomach and being a kid's volcano experiment. Because that's essentially what it does, right? You're going to get gassy. Your stomach is acidic, bicarb is basic. That'll cause a reaction to release water and CO2 or some type of gas. So, so yeah, those are the two. And then I would say creatine would be my third. Creatine is effective. Again, I'm speaking largely about distance running, but we know that those caffeine even helps with strength training. Also, so does beta alanine. It can give you kind of like that paresthesia, right? That like tingling feeling that you can get if you take pre-workout. I've personally never taken it, but it works a little different. From what I remember, I actually don't want to speak on it because I don't want to speak incorrectly. I want to say it has something to do with carnitine transferase, which is like one of the things we use to mobilize fats into our cells. And I think it affects that somehow, but I can't remember exactly. So those, like, I would say, and then maybe a fifth would be some type of beetroot juice, like nitric oxide booster. That one, the performance benefits are a little bit less clear, but it's still clear that it works. It's very effective for improving your cardiovascular health. And then the other one is capsaicin. This one's a little less supported, so this would be like my B tier. And this one obviously has some risks. So capsaicin is the active ingredient in hot sauce or spicy peppers. And so if you've ever eaten spicy food, you know that can definitely irritate your stomach. And then there's debate as to like how it works. So I think it activates this receptor in your mouth called TRPV1, which I recently learned they call it like TRPV1 because they got to call it fancy stuff. And don't quote me on that. I might have missaid that. But either way, it activates this receptor in your mouth. It's connected to your spinal cord. And so it bypasses your brain essentially, and it allows you to continue to produce muscle force even when you're fatigued, or at least that's the theory. And it can also help with cramping, believe it or not. That's the original study looked at cramping, and it improved cramp duration so that you weren't cramping as long. And so, yeah, those would be my kind of legal supplements that most people have access to. But again, with any supplement, especially with running, make sure that you've got a porta potty nearby, you've got some water, and you're not doing this on race day.
What about the Instagram supplements? By that I mean ketones and I feel like every week I see a new potion and lotion that's being promoted to me by some influencer looking for a quick paycheck. What's your, like, you don't even need to comment on anything specific, but
Yeah.
would you say for the most part, the supplement industry is mostly a scam?
I'll speak hesitantly because I think there are supplements that can work and do work. I gave the 4 that have, capsaicin's probably the one with the weakest evidence. The other 3, beta-alanine, caffeine, or maybe I said 4, beta-alanine, caffeine, and bicarb, the evidence for those, particularly in runners, is strong. Okay, they work. Beta-alanine's more for repeated sprints. Creatine is also more for repeated sprints. In distance runners, you can half the creatine dose, and it can increase strength and power without the increases in mass. But there's also new research that shows that creatine can also increase the likelihood of like complications with asthma. So if you have asthma, maybe take a look at that. Again, that's kind of cutting edge stuff. It's not like fully understood. But, a lot of the other stuff, I will say, and I don't have experience with this, but I did read the papers, and broccoli sprouts, beets, beetroot juice, those have some mechanistic evidence to support that they can help. And a lot of these things, what they help is actually time trials, like time to exhaustion. They don't usually help things like your 1500 meter time, right? So they're going to help like if you were to go out and run as far as you could at some given pace. A lot of these supplements will help with that, but they won't translate to a time trial, right? And so maybe they have more applicability for training than they do for necessarily like performance the day of. We know that bicarb will help performance the day of. We know that caffeine will help performance the day of. We know beta-alanine can help with performance the day of. It doesn't always. And we know that creatine certainly can help with sprint performance or repeated sprint performance. So, like creatine, I'm like, if you're an 800 runner, that might be one to consider. Just don't overtake too much of it, and make sure you don't have any underlying kidney issues or heart issues. I'm not a medical doctor, so like check all of this with your doctor. I'm just saying, largely speaking, from what the literature says. I want to be very clear about that. Disclaimer: I'm not a medical doctor. I have a PhD.
I'm not a medical doctor, and I'll promote creatine. It's someone goes to the hospital because of it, you can blame me.
Oh boy, you're bold, Dominic. So I would say
no. You do this long enough, and people play the games of, and it's just like, look, creatine's the most studied supplement ever of all time. Yes, if you don't have, like, the thing with these things is, like, if you have an issue with the supplement, you're the 0.001%, and I don't feel like I need to talk to the 0.001%. It's the same with gluten. Do we say, oh, don't have pasta, make sure you check with your doctor to see?
Dude, I'm actually, this is crazy, I'm gluten-free. So I have to eat food with gluten in it. If it's gluten free, like I just get so sick.
You can't rock with that.
Oh, dude.
You know what I mean, though? There's such stigma, and podcasts and media people, just, this is the beauty of having my own platform. It's like, well, if people want to be annoyed that I promote creatine, whatever. Try it. It's great. I will say, though, I need to be more consistent with it, because I get so many free products from companies, and there's a company called Create, I think was the name of it, and it was like these creatine gummies that were a little too good, to the point where I was like, there's got to be sugar in here or something. But yeah, I took it long enough. Oh, go ahead.
I think they reached out to me as well, but I don't take creatine because I'm trying to keep weight off. I was running a marathon, but maybe I'll reach back out. So you took your creatine gummies.
They taste well, and then I kind of stopped, and then I work with a company called BPN, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and they make amazing supplements.
You've interviewed Nick Bare, right?
No, but I know him.
Okay, so fun fact: Nick Bare went to IUP or CalU in Western Pennsylvania. I think he's a Western Pennsylvania guy. Yeah. And so we grew up not far from each other. We were in college at the same time. Our universities are rivals. And I see this dude, and he's jacked. I mean, he's big, right? He's fit. He's an elite hybrid athlete. And I saw his marathon time, and I was like, you've got to be kidding me. This guy ran 2:39 or something? And so my goal, the entire buildup for Richmond, I was like, my goal is to beat Nick Bare. If I'm not going to be as jacked as him, or as famous as him, or as rich as him, or as cool as him, or as attractive as him, I'm going to beat his marathon time. So I'm putting Nick Bare on notice when he's ready to race. I'm doing the Tobacco Trail Marathon. I'm ready to roll. Let's go, Nick.
And you ran 2:37?
I ran 2:37. Did he run faster than that recently?
By 2 minutes. No, he did an Ironman.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, he has 2 kids too. You guys have enough similarities. I'm here for it. I'll put in the call. No, I will say to Nick, I've never seen a more dedicated human being to fitness and wellness than that guy. That guy is. I was at the office, and I was like, oh, where's Nick? And someone was like, oh, he's a 3-hour bike ride. And you look in the gym, and he's just like down, just totally locked. Oh my gosh, yeah. And then heads in the sauna after that. And I mean, he's like, his life is so programmed, but he's done it long enough that to me, I'm like, whoa, I could never do that. But it's become habitual to him. But all that being said, I work with BPN. They have creatine, really good creatine powder. And the thing I really like about BPN, and this is important for listeners, is it's all what's called NSF. It's basically, they test it for outsized material or drugs, essentially, so that you wouldn't fail a drug test, which is super important if you're an athlete. So nothing sketchy in there. So anyways, all this being said, I haven't taken creatine long enough to the point where I can tangibly say, like, this makes a difference or this doesn't. But I will say, one of the products I take from BPN, I actually had it this morning before a really good workout. They have this G1M Sport Plus that you should look into. It's got caffeine, nootropics, carbs, and that stuff is the elixir. Like, I would say this if I didn't work with them. Every single lift I do, it feels there's a substantial difference, and I've never taken pre-workout either. I'm always sus of those products because I just think the short-term gains are great, but there's no way it's healthy for you. And this seems on the border of acceptable enough for your health. And so, like, not a crazy amount of caffeine. It's only like 150. Some pre-workouts have like 400 grams of, or 400. Yeah. So, that's the one product that I've taken, and I'm like, this has a sizable difference on my workouts if I have it before.
We're gonna have to run a study on this. BPN
I
Plus.
think so.
This is your call out. We'll do a study for you.
I'll
at
connect you
Elon
to him.
University. Yeah, I'd love to talk to him. He seems like an awesome dude. I have mad respect for him. The
whole team's amazing. Like, unbiased, like, I'm being fully honest and transparent. The BPN team, out of any brand I've ever worked with, takes better care of their people than anyone, period. Like, hands down. They're amazing people.
That's awesome. I don't have a single brand deal, so I just kind of want to talk to some people. But that's awesome. Yeah. So anyways, that's my take on all that stuff. Last thing I'll say about creatine is that it has a loading phase. So creatine has
that.
Yeah, so one of the things that you got to be careful, not necessarily careful, but you don't actually need that much creatine. Like, once it's loaded into your system, I can't remember the study. I've looked for it, but they looked at, from what I remember, urinary creatine content or urinary creatine, like whatever it's processed into. And essentially you can track that over time, right? And you can see how much is getting into your system, right? Because you're getting rid of it. And so they had people load creatine and they measured it and eventually it levels off, right? Or maybe it actually keeps going up because you're just peeing out the extra stuff. And then what they did is they saw, like, okay, how long will they continue to pee out, quote unquote, extra creatine before it, like, starts to fall down? And it stays elevated for, like, I want to say like 2 or 3 weeks after they stop taking it. Like, it stays in your system a good while, and then before it, gets out of your system. It's not like an SSRI where you're going to have like withdrawal or anything, but it stays in your system for a good while. And so this is why you can go through phases of loading it and unloading it. And that's kind of to my understanding, where that theory comes from.
Wrapping up this conversation, what's the number one piece of applicable advice from all of your studies or findings that you think people should apply into their training in 2026?
I am a fan of Arthur Lydiard, so take that with a grain of salt. But simply put, you should run more. You should run more. And obviously there are bounds to everything. I feel like I always need to caveat things, but run more. We know that mileage predicts marathon success. We know that easy miles predicts IAAF points, not just in the marathon, but in distance events altogether. Obviously, this has some constraints for elite milers or elite 800 runners. I would say that's a different category. I'm making a series of posts about this right now. But I would say run more miles. If you're an 800 runner and you're fast, then sprint more. Not too much, but do more sprints. And I think that generally speaking, more mileage is going to help you, especially when you taper off of it. So I think one thing that I'm talking to an athlete right now about this, he's kind of struggling with, like, well, I'm not performing that great in workouts. And I'm like, good. I'm like, you're tired, right? He's like, yeah, I'm sleeping all the time. I'm super tired. I'm like, that's good. That's what we want right now. It's December. We want you to have a lot of volume. He's handling it well. And then what we're going to do is we're going to taper him off, and he's going to do more intensity and do a traditional, like, periodization. He's going to peak in PR. So, the data is strong for easy miles. Don't run them too fast. Make sure you don't do your long run more than 10% of your previous long run. And get out there and just keep putting in miles. Double, triple if you need to. You don't need to triple. But I would say that that's probably the biggest piece of advice I would give any new runner, any experienced runner, especially if you're a runner that's plateauing. Like, try more mileage. It could hurt you, but if you run it slow, it really shouldn't.
I think running more mileage, Bill, is a higher risk of injury than creatine is to health. You can do a study on that. I'll stand by creatine. Not being paid to say this by the big C. Speaking of food, even though creatine isn't food, kind of. Final question I ask every guest on every single podcast. If you had Gordon Ramsay coming over to your house for dinner, what would you choose to make for him?
What would I make for him?
Yes, your wife can't help you, just you.
a glass of water. He would eviscerate anything, but if I had to make something, I'm going to go with, man, this is a tough one. I'm going to go with my mom's fried chicken. I know that sounds crazy growing up in Western Pennsylvania, but my mom makes elite fried chicken. I don't know. I think I have it mostly figured out. I'd share the details, but I would say that, that's family lore. But it's perfect. It's never undercooked. It's never overcooked. And the bread stays on. And I don't know how I've got it almost done, but if I knew he was coming over, talk to my mom, I'd get that sucker pretty dialed in, and I'd make him some fried chicken.
It's that motherly love, my mom would always say. That's the special ingredient. Doctor, thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. I'll have to get you back on. So many other things we could jam on and discuss, but we'll save it for another day. And keep crushing. Have a great Christmas, holiday season, and appreciate the time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man.